Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Easy English Spark Channel. I'm thrilled you're here today and ready to boost your English listening and speaking skills. In this video, we'll dive into a captivating 10-chapter story, just enough to keep things simple yet engaging. Over the next few minutes, you'll follow characters like Aaron, Marcus, Diana, and more, all while sharpening your ability to understand spoken English and respond confidently. So grab your notebook, settle in, and let's light up your English journey with these easy-to-follow chapters. Chapter 1. The Misplaced Resume. Let me tell you a story about Aaron Bennett, a freshly minted art school graduate living in a cramped flat in Bristol with his patient aunt, Margaret Calloway. Every dawn she brewed weak tea, set 2 slices of toast on the table, and urged, "Keep hunting, Aaron. The right door will open." But weeks of unanswered emails and polite rejections had thinned his optimism to a thread. One stormy Monday, he decided the universe owed him a break. He buttoned the only ironed shirt he owned, slipped into scuffed dress shoes, and marched to the corner news kiosk for a paper. Back home, he spread the classifieds across the kitchen table like treasure maps. Barista, warehouse picker, junior telemarketer. None fit. Then one bold line caught his eye. Graphic design assistant, Tyndall. Commerce City Center. Must know Adobe, love typefaces, crave learning. Tyndall & Co-Styler was a boutique agency whose work he'd admired since first year. His pulse quickened. He spent that afternoon drafting the most careful cover letter of his life. Fonts chosen, margins perfect, a gentle hint of personality in every sentence. He printed it on fresh ivory stock, tucked in his slim portfolio of posters and logo concepts, and mailed the envelope before courage could evaporate. A week crawled by. Friday morning, as rain peppered the skylight, a cream envelope slipped through the letterbox. Inside, neat serif type announced, "We are pleased to invite you to interview on Tuesday at 9 a.m. Please bring your portfolio. Fiona Strand, Creative Director." Aaron whooped so loudly Aunt Margaret nearly dropped her teapot. All weekend he practiced answers into a blotchy bathroom mirror. Favorite designers, toughest deadline, biggest lesson learned. He rearranged his portfolio twice, then a third time, smoothing each plastic sleeve until it shone. Tuesday dawned slate gray and gusty. He left at 7:30, blazer a size too big, portfolio clutched like a life vest. At 12 Camden Walk aglass, lobby glittered behind double doors. 6 other hopefuls stood waiting, jittery smiles fixed in place. A receptionist offered water and directed them, one by one, toward Fiona Strand's office. When Aaron's turn arrived, he stepped into a sunlit, Room lined with framed campaign prints. Fiona greeted him with brisk warmth and dived straight into questions. Initially his voice wavered, but passion steadied it. He spoke of late-night typography experiments, of peeling paint on city walls inspiring color palettes, of collaboration, dinners fueled by instant noodles and ambition. Yet nerves returned whenever her pen paused above the notes page. A few answers tangled and fell flat. 20 minutes later, she closed the portfolio, smiled courteously, and said, "Thank you, Mr. Bennett. Please wait just outside." Relief flooded him, then panic as he realized there were two identical doors. He chose the one on the left, stepped through, and heard a quiet click. Darkness. The faint smell of toner. He had entered a supply closet. Heart hammering. He twisted the knob. Locked. He knocked, called out, but footfalls in the corridor were already receding. Minutes blurred. A single strip light flickered off automatically. Aaron slid down onto a carton of printer paper, hugging his portfolio. Eventually, exhaustion dulled panic. He dozed among reams and unused staplers. When he woke, silence filled the building. Then, keys jangling, a door opening, someone muttered about rubbish bins. A beam of torchlight spilled into the closet, revealing a startled cleaner in a high-vis vest. "Good heavens, love. How long have you been in there?" Aaron squinted at the hallway clock. 5:40 a.m. "Since yesterday," he croaked. "I had an interview." The cleaner's eyebrows lifted with sympathy and disbelief. "Interview? They finished hours ago. Agency's already chosen their candidate, I'm afraid." Embarrassment scorched his cheeks as he stumbled out. Outside, dawn painted the sky pale pink. He trudged back through empty streets, portfolio hanging at his side like a silent accusation. At home, Aunt Margaret opened the door before he'd knocked. Without a word, she wrapped him in a hug that smelled of chamomile. "I got locked in a cupboard," he mumbled, half laughing, half crying. "That just means your real job wasn't in there," she whispered. "Another door, Aaron. We'll find it." And though humiliation clung to him like damp wool, something steadier stirred beneath it. The stubborn belief that the next envelope, somewhere, would open into the room meant for him, and this time he'd find the right door on the very first try. Chapter 2. Marcus's Misdirected Rage. Let me introduce you to Marcus Dalton, a 45-year-old municipal auditor in Manchester who prided himself on balance sheets, punctual train rides, and an orderly life, until the day a surge of jealousy toppled every column of his composure. Marcus had been married to Helena for nearly a decade. She was a gifted violinist in the Northwest Chamber Collective, rehearsing afternoons and tutoring pupils in their terraced home on Chester Road. At first, Marcus loved the music that drifted through the hallway, scales at breakfast, Vivaldi at tea. But 2 months ago, the ensemble hired Lucas Ford, a dashing 27-year-old guest conductor from Oxford. Lucas scheduled extra practice sessions, sent late-night progress notes, and once dropped off sheet music at the door while Marcus was reviewing expense claims in the loft. Each new courtesy from Lucas scraped Marcus's nerves a little thinner. He tried to mask his unease with cordial smiles, yet suspicion brewed. When Helena chuckled at her phone, Marcus wondered, "Is that him?" When she returned glowing from rehearsal, he pictured her laughing at jokes he hadn't heard. Nights grew restless, spreadsheets blurred behind worries he could not audit away. Though, breaking point arrived on a raw Thursday in early December. Gray sleet streaked the office windows as Marcus stamped "approved" on a stack of invoices, then glanced at the clock. 1:45 p.m. Helena's sectional rehearsals usually wrapped by 3. What if Lucas drives her home? The thought flashed like a warning light. Without a formal sign out, he grabbed his coat, bolted down the stairwell, and steered his aging Vauxhall toward Chester Road, tires hissing on wet asphalt. When Marcus turned the final corner, a cherry-red Vespa shimmered at the curb in front of his house. His chest tightened. Of course. It's Lucas's flashy scooter. In the glove box lay an old steel hammer his late father had kept for emergencies. Marcus's hand closed around its handle before he fully knew what he meant to do. Rain needled his face as he strode to the Vespa. Crack. One mirror shattered, silver shards cascading into the gutter. Crash. The headlamp caved, plastic splintering like ice. With every swing, Marcus muttered, "Stay away, stay away." Steam from his breath mingled with the drizzle. The street echoed with his ragged panting. Footsteps suddenly clicked behind him. Marcus wheeled around, hammer poised, only to see Lucas trotting across the lawn, wobbling on a rust-patched bicycle, violin case slung over one shoulder. Lucas waved cheerily. "Afternoon, Mr. Dalton. Borrowed Helena's spare bike. My train's in 20 minutes. He launched himself down the lane, oblivious to the wrecked scooter. The front door opened. Helena stepped out, sheet music in hand, eyes widening at the sight. "Marcus, what happened to Richard's Vespa?" "Richard's?" Marcus echoed. "My brother drove up from London this morning. That's his rental." Her voice trembled between shock and worry. Marcus stared at the crushed headlamp, the hammer slipping from his grip, clanging onto the curb. Rain soaked his collar, shame soaked deeper. Richard emerged from the hallway, carrying a cello stand. He froze, following Helena's gaze to the mangled scooter. "Blimey, who hit my bike?" Words deserted Marcus. Pulse thudding in his ears, he stumbled to the Vauxhall, slammed the door, and sped away, wipers thrashing. The city blurred past while guilt replayed each violent swing in cinematic slow motion. He parked under a railway arch, head on the steering wheel, breath fogging the windscreen. The hammer lay on the passenger seat like evidence. I've lost Helena's trust and vandalized her brother's property. For the first time in his ordered life, Marcus felt truly, irreversibly off balance. That evening he phoned Helena, but the call went to voicemail. He tried Richard next, apology half-formed, but couldn't press dial. Instead, he drove aimlessly until midnight, then returned to a silent house. A note on the kitchen table, Helena's neat script. "I'm at Mum's tonight. We need to talk, but only when you're ready to be honest." Marcus spent the night on the sofa, sleep torn by nightmares of shattering glass and Lucas's bicycle bell fading into darkness. Morning brought pale sunshine and a resolve as fragile as the broken mirror. He rang Richard first, voice shaking. "I smashed your Vespa. I thought it belonged to someone else. I'll pay every penny." Richard, groggy but gracious, sighed. "Bikes can be fixed. Sort things with Helena." At noon, Marcus drove to his mother-in-law's. Helena opened the door, arms folded. Under her calm expression lay wounded disbelief. Marcus met her gaze and, for once, dropped every defense. He confessed the jealousy, the insecurity, the hammer, the instant regret. Words poured out, messy, contrite, unguarded. When silence settled, Helena spoke quietly. "I married you, Marcus. I share music with Lucas. I share my life with you. If you can't trust that, we need help." She stepped aside, letting him inside, but not yet embracing him. 2 weeks later, the Daltons sat in a counselor's office, a box of tissues between them, awkward but committed. Marcus learned to voice fear before it fermented into rage. Helena learned to recognize his spirals sooner. Reparations for the Vespa were paid, along with an awkward but heartfelt dinner for Richard. On a chill March evening, Marcus attended the collective's spring concert. Lucas bowed to the audience, cued the ensemble, and Helena's violin soared through the hall. Marcus listened, hand over heart. Not a heartbeat of envy, only admiration. He understood at last that love, like music, demands practiced trust. Strike the wrong chord in anger, and you risk shattering more than a mirror. And so the man who once measured life in neat columns began a different kind of audit, tracking moments of gratitude, noting doubts before they grew numbers, and balancing love not with suspicion, but with faith hard-earned and daily renewed. Chapter 3. Slot Wars. Let me paint you a picture of a blistering July afternoon on Melody Avenue, the busiest shopping strip in Liverpool. Heat shimmered off windscreens, exhaust fumes hung lazy in the air, and every driver circled the supermarket, like a vulture over a carcass, hoping an empty bay might magically appear. Into this frenzy rolled Diana Prescott, tech startup founder, trademark sunglasses perched on her head, and a midnight blue electric sedan that cost more than most houses on the street. She liked efficiency, apps that delivered groceries in 10 minutes, smartwatches that counted every heartbeat. But today there was no shortcut to parking. She cruised once, twice, 3 times around the asphalt maze, muttering, "Surely somebody is leaving." Then, just past the cart return, she spotted it, a gap between a battered black hatchback and a parked motorbike. Truth be told, the space looked scarcely longer than her bonnet, but Diana, self-proclaimed expert parallel parker, decided it would do. She flicked on the indicator, edged forward, and began the slow ballet of mirrors and reverse. Meanwhile, 2 university students, Mia and Rowena, bumped up the entrance ramp in a teal Toyota that wheezed at every gear change. They had only come for cheap noodles and the industrial-sized jar of peanut butter that kept them alive between exams, but the sight of an almost empty slot felt like striking gold. Rowena pointed. "There, next to the bike. Perfect for us." Mia nodded, checked her mirrors, and, in a burst of overconfidence, swung the Toyota straight into the opening, nose first, claiming the space before Diana had maneuvered halfway. Tires screeched. Diana's hazard lights flashed angrily. She hit the horn twice. Mia rolled down her window, offered an apologetic shrug, and chirped, "When you drive a smaller car, it's easier to squeeze in, yeah?" Then she switched off. The engine, oblivious to Diana's widening eyes. Diana exhaled a hiss of disbelief. She reversed out, straightened, and called after them, "Learn some manners before you steal someone's slot." But Mia and Rowena were already unloading reusable bags, chatting about deadlines and missing keys. Fury bubbled inside Diana. She pulled forward, found a wider bay at the far end of the lot, and parked. But the injustice ate at her. How dare they? She imagined every time she'd been dismissed for being too young in boardrooms, every tech bro who'd assumed she couldn't code. The sting felt identical. Inside the store, chance kept throwing the 3 women together. In produce, Diana reached for a punnet of strawberries. Mia's elbow knocked it from her grasp. Then, in tinned goods, Rowena's trolley blocked the aisle. Each encounter reheated Diana's anger until it fizzed like cola shaken in the sun. By checkout, she'd decided on revenge. As Mia and Rowena queued at the self-service terminals, Diana paid at the express lane, hurried outside, and checked the lot. The teal Toyota still sat smugly between bike and hatchback. She climbed into her sedan, reversed a respectable distance, and took several slow breaths. Just a lesson, she muttered. Then she shifted into drive and crept forward, touching the Toyota's rear bumper with a deliberate nudge. Plastic creaked. She eased back, satisfied she'd left a neat crescent dent beneath their license plate. Nothing catastrophic, but enough to ensure a pricey repair. A tap on her window startled her. It was Yusuf, the elderly parking attendant, fluorescent vest glowing in the late-day sun. He'd witnessed everything. "Afternoon, madam," he said, voice calm as drizzle. "Bit tight in this lot, isn't it?" Diana swallowed. "Yes. I may have rolled too far." Yusuf folded his arms. "Might be wise to stick around. Those young ladies will want insurance details." Diana's cheeks burned. Pride told her to gun the accelerator and escape. Conscience, helped by Yusuf's steady gaze, kept her rooted. Moments later, Mia and Rowena appeared, trolley rattling. They saw the dent, then Diana, then the hammer of guilt expression on her face. Rowena groaned. "First our radiator cap blows. Now this?" Mia addressed Diana directly. "Was this because we squeezed in earlier? Look, we're sorry, but—" Diana cut her off, voice brittle. "You jumped the queue, but I shouldn't have reacted like that." She opened her glove box, pulled out insurance papers, and handed them over. "I'll cover all repairs." Rowena blinked. "Seriously?" "Seriously," Diana said, shoulders slumping. "I let a parking space dictate my behavior. It was childish." Yusuf cleared his throat. "Since everyone's being civil, may I suggest a cheaper solution?" He pointed to a small body shop card pinned on the notice board. "They fix dents for half what the dealer charges. If Ms. Prescott pays, and you girls accept, no one's premiums rise." The three women exchanged glances. Mia nodded slowly. "Fair enough." An hour later, they sat together on a plastic bench outside the workshop, while a mechanic popped out the dent with a suction cup. Conversation stumbled at first, then found common ground. Summer heat, rising rents, the impossibility of parking in this city. Diana learned Mia studied biomedical engineering, Rowena illustration. The students discovered Diana built software that helped charities allocate resources. By the time the Toyota rolled back, bumper smooth and shiny, awkwardness had cooled into something like respect. Mia held out her hand. "Thank you, Ms. Prescott. Lesson learned on our end. Politeness first, even in a rush. Diana shook it. And from me, big car, bigger patience. They laughed. Yusuf, sweeping litter nearby, raised his cap in salute as they drove off in opposite directions. One teal, one midnight blue. Each woman surprised at how a petty clash over asphalt ended not with lawsuits, but with a handshake and a new story. To tell about the day civility trumped righteous fury in the war for the last parking space. Chapter 4. The Great Book Migration. Picture a sleepy riverside town called Grendale, where the Jordan Public Library sat wedged between a bakery and a barber shop. The building was a red brick shoebox, 2 floors, 90 years old, with radiators that hissed in winter and fans that groaned in summer. Over the decades, the town kept growing, and the library kept buying picture books, travel guides, crime sagas, cookbooks, until every shelf bowed like a tired mule. Even the stairwell handrail had a row of encyclopedias balanced along it, temporarily, though nobody remembered when temporary began. One foggy morning in early October, Mrs. Edith Linwood, the white-haired head librarian, tapped a teaspoon against a mug to call her staff meeting to order. 5 employees gathered among teetering towers of unshelved returns. Edith cleared her throat. Friends, the council finally approved our move to the new Grendale Cultural Center. Moving day is the 20th of November, 6 weeks away. Yet, the removal quote is higher than our entire annual budget. We have to shrink the workload or forget the move. She let that sink in. 1,000 cardboard boxes, back-breaking labor, and a bill they couldn't pay. Silence settled until Carla Moreno, the youngest assistant, raised a tentative hand. Carla was 24, fresh from library school, forever, scribbling ideas in a spiral notebook. "What if," she began, "we let our patrons do the heavy lifting?" Bemused looks circled the table. Carla opened her notebook. "Right now, borrowers can take 4 books for 3 weeks. Let's bump that to 6 books for 6 weeks, from today until we reopen. Advertise it as an autumn reading challenge. Borrow, big, read bigger. Our shelves will empty themselves, and on moving day we'll have only a skeleton collection left to box." Edith's eyebrows climbed, but curiosity softened her skepticism. 6 books, 6 weeks. Would council approve? "I'll draft the notice by lunchtime," Carla promised. That afternoon, posters sprouted across town, on cafe corkboards, pharmacy windows, even the bus shelter. Operation Autumn Pages. Check out 6 books. Keep them. 6 weeks. Help us fly to our new nest on November 20th. Social media lit up. School teachers announced extra credit reading lists. The bakery offered a free ginger cookie to anyone who displayed a stamped library receipt. Within 10 days, the circulation desk turned into a conveyor belt. Families trundled in with wagons, teens loaded backpacks, retirees filled tote bags. Mrs. Hutchins, aged 83, staggered out clutching 5 gardening manuals and 1 spicy romance for balance. Shelves yawned wider every hour. Edith walked the aisles each evening like a captain inspecting an evacuated ship. Half empty, cases, lonely bookends, dust rings where reference atlases once lay. She allowed herself a secret grin. By mid-November, fewer than 1,000 volumes remained, mostly outdated tax codes and a suspicious number of diet cookbooks from 1997. Movers arrived on the 20th expecting chaos, only to find neat piles awaiting 20 easy trips across town. They finished before lunch, puzzled but grateful. The new cultural center gleamed. 4 stories of glass and cedar, sunlight pooling onto study pods, wide aisles whisper ready for fresh stock. Edith positioned a brass bell at the entrance and hung a banner. Welcome home, Jordan Library. Reopening December 1st. Over the following fortnight, patrons drifted back carrying armfuls of books like migrating geese returning in spring. Some arrived early, anxious they had miscounted the 6 weeks. Others lingered to enjoy the airy reading lounge. An 8-year-old named Theo brought cupcakes for the staff because he said, "Books taste better when the library is happy." Nobody argued. On December 1st, Edith rang her brass bell as the doors opened officially. Carla stood beside her, cheeks flushed with pride. "We saved nearly 80% of the moving estimate," Edith whispered. "More, if you count my back," Carla laughed. "All thanks to our secret army of volunteer movers." Edith shook her head warmly. "Not secret anymore. I've sent the council a full report titled The Great Book Migration. They may replicate it citywide." That evening, as the last reader checked out a brand new mystery novel and winter twilight draped the glass facade in violet, Edith turned off the desk lamp. She glanced across rows of freshly returned volumes, each spine a tiny traveler now settled into its new burrow. To an outsider, it was just a library move. To the people of Glendale, it was a communal relay, a reminder that stories belong as much to the hands that carry them as to the shelves that store them. And somewhere in a quiet corner, Carla jotted a final note in her spiral book. When space runs out, invite readers to take the wait. Books were made to journey. Chapter 5: The Unfortunate Championship. I want you to imagine a silver dawn over Willowbrook Golf Club, a jewel of a course tucked between 2 lakes in rural Yorkshire. Dew lay on every blade of grass like melted pearls. Birds sang their bravado. From the poplars, and at the first tee box stood Philip Hayes. Phil to friends, trying to tame a hand that wouldn't stop trembling. Phil was only 26, yet already a minor legend in county golf. Supple swing, easy grin, the sort of player who could carve a 5-iron dead straight while chatting about last night's football. But until that day, he'd never stepped onto a stage bigger than the East Riding Cup. Now he was entered in the Lakeside Invitational, 2 rounds, 36 holes, a gallery of 200, and a dozen professionals using the event as tune-up before the European Tour. His name on the same pairing sheet as theirs felt both thrilling and ridiculous. I watched from the rope line as he teed his ball, drew the driver back, and, whiff, sent it screaming left into a cedar grove. A marshal raised a red flag. Phil winced, forced a grin at the gallery, and trudged off to locate the ball among pine cones. 2 whacks later, he was still in the trees. A third punch-out ricocheted off a branch and thumped a spectator's folding chair. He walked onto the fairway 3 shots heavier and visibly rattled. By the turn, he'd lost 4 balls, 1 to a water hazard, 1 to deep fescue, and 2 to a bunker whose lip he could not clear. His caddy, Darian, kept murmuring, "Tempo, mate, tempo." But Phil's rhythm was gone, hijacked by the thud of his own heartbeat. After a wilted sandwich, at the halfway hut he tried to reset, yet calamity clung like static. On the par 5 10th, he skied a 3-wood. It landed in a pond with a theatrical ploop. The gallery groaned in sympathy. Phil jabbed the turf with his club, shoulders sagging. "This isn't golf," he muttered to Darian. "It's archaeology. I'm just digging holes." But the moment everyone would remember came 4 holes later. The 11th at Willowbrook is a short par 3 over a serpentine creek. Picturesque, postcard perfect, the kind of hole that sells calendars. Phil selected an 8-iron, took a breath, swung, and watched the ball leave the club face on a majestic arc that seemed, finally, true. It landed a pace short of the green, bounced and rolled directly into the only sprinkler head on the fringe, rocketing sideways like a pinball until it trickled down the slope and back into the very creek it had just cleared. Phil's lips parted in disbelief. A polite ripple of "ooh" drifted from the crowd. The marshal raised another red flag. Phil exhaled something that was half laugh, half groan, then whispered, "You couldn't script that." But fate was still drafting. At the par 4, 14th, he laced a drive down the center, his first pure shot all day, leaving a wedge in. Redemption seemed possible. He addressed the ball and bladed it dead right into a hospitality marquee. The ball clanged off a catering trolley, startling. A waiter who spilled lemonade over 2 sponsors. Phil jogged over, cap in hand, apologizing profusely while volunteers located the ball underneath a linen skirt. He took a free drop beside startled patrons, pitched onto the green, missed the bogey putt, and walked to the 15th T7 over. Par and bleeding confidence. I met his eyes briefly through the gallery ropes. They were wide, shiny, a little lost. Darian placed a hand on his shoulder, showed him a silver coin, Phil's lucky marker, a keepsake from his grandfather, then slipped it into Phil's palm. "One good swing," I heard Darian whisper. "Just give me one." Phil nodded, sniffed. Once and on 15 produced a textbook draw that cozied 10 feet from the flag. The crowd applauded, sensing a spark of the prodigy they'd heard about. He sank the birdie putt, raised a sheepish fist, and for 3 holes steadied the ship. Then came the home hole, a par 4 skirting Willow Lake. Pressure and memory collided. He needed par to break 80, a small dignity after a day of humiliation. His drive sailed but peeled at the last second, clattering into reeds on the lake bank. He found the ball sitting on a downslope, half buried in mud. He tried a heroic punch shot. It splashed, disappeared, and with it went the last of his composure. Phil stood in silence, eyes fixed on expanding ripples. Slowly, he unstrapped the golf bag, hoisted it above his head, and in one fluid motion hurled the entire thing, irons, woods, rain hood and all, into Willow Lake. The gallery gasped, then quieted. To the hush of lapping water, Phil turned, marched toward the car park, spikes clicking like metronome beats of surrender. He'd gone 20 paces when he froze, spun, and strode back to the shoreline. For a heartbeat, everyone thought he might dive after the clubs. Instead, he waded knee-deep, reached into the floating bag pocket, retrieved the car keys he'd forgotten, and trudged out dripping but dignified. A sprinkle of nervous laughter fluttered among the spectators. Someone even clapped. The next morning, local papers splashed the headline, "Rising Star Makes Biggest Splash at Lakeside." Some pundits called it a tantrum, others a teachable moment. Phil himself issued a statement. "Pressure revealed gaps in my mental game. I'll be back with a towel and a better attitude." True to his word, he returned a month later for a charity scramble, borrowed clubs, shot 2 under, and donated the prize to junior golf. But I still remember that first humiliation more vividly than any comeback, because it showed how thin the membrane is between brilliance and breakdown. A bad bounce, a sprinkler head, a swallowed drive. Tiny things that accumulate until even the calmest athlete can't see past the storm cloud gathering inside his own skull. Phil learned it the wet way. The rest of us learned simply by watching, hearts in our throats, as an entire championship drowned and a young man retrieved nothing but a set of keys and the fragile promise that tomorrow, perhaps, would swing truer. Chapter 6. Echoes of 1932. Picture a Thursday evening in early autumn at the Crown and Scroll, a wood-paneled pub tucked behind Leeds Market. The room smells of oak smoke and malt vinegar. Dominoes rattle on one table. Darts thump on cork at the far wall. In a booth beneath the stained glass window sits Stanley Marks. Stan to everyone, an 87-year-old retired railway porter, with a face as furrowed as Yorkshire moorland. Stan comes every week at 6:30 sharp, always, wearing a tweed jacket polished shiny at the elbows. He nurses exactly 2 pints of bitter and swaps stories with his lifelong friends, Bill and Harry. There is, however, one rule. If you want Stan to hear you, you must sit on his right. His left ear has been stone dead since a tram accident inside in Liverpool back in 1939, when he was just a boy. On this particular night, the talk turns to ration books, wartime concerts, and that strange summer when Sheffield United nearly won the cup. Bill, who has an uncanny talent for mimicry, decides to reenact their headmaster's infamous Latin lesson, complete with flailing arms and thunderous vowels. Harry and I brace ourselves. Bill launches into quidquid Latin dictum sit, altum, videtur, and the whole table collapses in laughter. Stan slaps the wood so hard his cap flies off. Then he tips back in a belly laugh that seems to wind up from his boots. Mid-chuckle, he leans too far, slides from the bench, and lands on the flagstones with a thud. The room gasps. Glasses freeze half raised. Bill and I dart down to haul him up. Stan sits upright, blinking, beard bristling, suddenly serious. Between his shoes lies a tiny yellowed rectangle of cardboard no larger than a postage stamp. Bill picks it up, squints, and whistles. "It's a railway ticket," he says, turning it under the pendant lamp. "Liverpool Lime Street to Southport. Punch dated 4th August 1932. Harry raises an eyebrow. 1932? That's older than my bloody hip. Bill passes it to Stan. The old man stares at the ticket as though it were a ghost. For D. A moment nobody speaks. Then Stan lifts a trembling hand to his left ear, rubs the lobe, blinks again, and his eyes fill with stunned wonder. "Say something, lad," he whispers to Bill. Bill clears his throat, leans close to Stan's left side, and says very softly, "Haddock and chips." Stan's head jerks. "I heard that." His voice cracks. Clear as chapel bells. A hush falls over the whole pub. Even the dominoes stop clacking. Stan cradles the brittle ticket with 2 fingers. I remember this," he murmurs. "Mum took me on a seaside day trip when I was 7. I kept the ticket in my pocket for luck. But how in God's name did it get in my ear?" Harry, eyes wide behind thick spectacles, ventures a theory. Back in '39, during the Liverpool tram crash, Stan was thrown to the floor. Doctors patched a scalp cut but never solved the sudden deafness. Maybe the ticket slipped in then, Harry says, and sat there for, what, 86 years? The barmaid, Maggie, materializes with a torch. She inspects Stan's ear. Like a jeweler appraising a gem, then breaks into a grin. It's clear as a bell now. Nothing lodged. She pats Stan's shoulder, and the pub releases a collective cheer that rattles the condiment bottles. Stan's eyes mist over. All those decades, he breathes, half laughing, half crying. I thought the silence was permanent. He presses the ticket to his chest. And all the while it was this little scrap of paper, hiding, holding the sound prisoner. Bill signals for 3 whiskeys. To the loudest miracle in West Yorkshire, he toasts. Glasses clink. Conversation floods back. In stereo for Stan for the first time since King George VI was on the throne. He startles at clinks and coughs he'd forgotten existed. Chuckles when Maggie drops a spoon. Marvels at the layered murmur of patrons planning weekends and bemoaning Leeds United. The world, long muffled, has returned in full color. As last orders ring, Stan tucks the 1932 ticket into his wallet behind his bus pass, then rises and thanks every person in the pub for sharing the moment. Outside, the night air hums with distant traffic, something he hasn't truly heard since childhood. He turns his head left, right, left again, testing, confirming, grinning. Bill asks if he's all right for the walk home. Stan chuckles, voice rich with newfound resonance. Aye, lad, I've managed 87 years on one ear. Imagine what mischief I'll manage with 2. The 3 friends vanish up Brigate, their laughter echoing against brick facades. Back inside the Crown and Scroll, the regulars keep repeating the tale. How a forgotten ticket from 1932 slipped free at just the right moment. How a lost sound found its way home. And how sometimes the smallest relics carry the weight and wonder of an entire lifetime. Chapter 7. A Hat Too Far. Allow me to take you to Eldergate House, an Art Deco block in Oldham where Apex Publishing rents the entire 3rd floor. The corridors smell of fresh toner and stale coffee. Proofs lie in drifts beside every desk. At 9:30 each morning, Dr. Charles Fairchild, Charlie to his authors, arrives humming a show tune, pocket watch gleaming, enthusiasm contagious. Charlie is 56, genial, and almost painfully tidy. Pressed waistcoat, polished brogues, and a lapel pin in the shape of a fountain pen. One Tuesday in spring, he strolled in wearing something new. A chocolate brown wool fedora with a floppy brim and a crown far taller than fashion advises. He had found it, he said, on an antiques market stall next to a box of Edwardian walking sticks. The hat looked as though it belonged on a scarecrow, or perhaps a jazz trumpeter lost in 1928, but Charlie wore it with the innocence of a man convinced he'd discovered sartorial gold. His staff, 30 editors, proofreaders, and designers, shared a Slack channel titled Hats Off. Within minutes, someone posted a candid phone photo of Charlie striding past reception. Indiana Jones loses map, keeps hat. Reaction emojis exploded. Yet to his face, they offered only courteous nods. 2 junior editors, Fiona Lee and Martin Lampkin, found the whole business irresistible. At lunch, they hatched a prank. They would replace Charlie's beloved fedora with a similar model, but comically wrong in size, and watch confusion bloom. It would be, they reasoned, a victimless joke, harmless levity to break deadline tension. Day 1. Charlie slipped out for his customary beetroot and cheddar sandwich. Fiona and Martin hurried to his office, exchanged the fedora for an absurdly oversized straw boater they'd picked up in a charity shop. Wide brim, faded ribbon, practically a sun umbrella. When Charlie returned, he reached for his hat, paused, and frowned as the brim collapsed over his ears. Odd, he murmured, adjusting the monstrous pancake. Down the corridor he trod, blind on both sides, greeting bewildered authors with polite doffs that sent the ribbon flapping like bunting. Slack howled. Day 2. At 11 a.m., Charlie left for a printer's meeting. The conspirators struck again, removing the boater and hanging in its place a lime green trilby 2 sizes too small. That evening, Charlie attempted to settle it atop his graying curls. The crown refused, clamping his temples like a vice. He winced all the way to the lift. Slack posted side-by-side photos. The Incredible Shrinking Hat, Parts 1 and 2. Day 3. A conference call kept Charlie out of his office for half an hour. Fiona and Martin executed the coup de grace, a child-size beanie complete with spinning plastic propeller. They positioned it neatly on the coat peg, props facing forward like a proud little windmill. It was this final indignity that broke the spell. Charlie finished the call, fetched his umbrella, reached for the peg, then stared. He pinched the tiny beanie between thumb and forefinger, gazed at the toy propeller, and chuckled. But the chuckle faded into something weightier, a sigh that let disappointment leak into the room. He set the beanie on his desk blotter, sat slowly, and pressed the intercom. Could Fiona Lee and Martin Lampkin step into my office a moment? The walk from open plan to glass door felt eternal. Fiona's stomach fluttered. Martin rehearsed apologies. They entered to find Charlie studying the propeller as though it were a difficult footnote. On the windowsill sat the straw saucer and the lime trilby. His real fedora lay folded on a chair, as dignified as a retired colonel after bad parade. Duty. Charlie spoke softly. Publishing thrives on humor, but also on respect. I enjoy a good joke. He tapped the beanie. Yet, 3 days running you altered something personal without asking. What if I had a client meeting? Or a funeral? He paused, letting the miniature blade spin in the draft from the vent. Humor should lift, not belittle. Fiona's cheeks blazed scarlet. We're deeply sorry, sir. It was childish. Martin nodded. We'll replace anything damaged and apologize publicly. Charlie's expression softened. He lifted the fedora, smoothed its crown. This hat, he said, belonged to my grandfather. He wore it the day Apex printed its first monograph in 1937. It reminds me that stories outlive us. A beat of silence passed. The propeller clicked to a halt. Tell you what, you may redeem yourselves over the next month by organizing our charity book sale. 30 crates in the basement need cataloging. They accepted at once, relieved, chastened, grateful. Charlie dismissed them with a tired wave and placed the fedora on his head. It settled at last, exactly right. Weeks later, the charity sale raised more than £5,000 for a literacy trust. Fiona and Martin worked late, hauled boxes, learned obscure ISBN prefixes, and found new respect for both books and boundaries. On the final afternoon, Charlie arrived carrying 3 gift bags. To Fiona he presented a tasteful burgundy cloche, to Martin a gray newsboy cap, and for himself a modest flat cap he'd bought at the same antique stall. No more fedoras? Martin asked, half teasing. Charlie winked. A man can evolve, Mr. Lampkin. Besides, this flat cap leaves no room for, how do you call it, creative swaps. Laughter rippled among the staff. The lesson had landed, but if you happen to drop by Eldergate House after hours, you'll still see the chocolate-brown fedora resting beneath a glass dome on Charlie's bookshelf, label reading, Mind, the stories we wear and the people who wear them. Chapter 8. The Christmas Mix-Up. Picture a fog-soaked Christmas Eve on Foxglove Lane, a brand-new housing estate on the outskirts of Carlisle, where every sandstone townhouse looks like it was duplicated by a photocopier. Into this maze rolled the Williams family after a 4-hour trek from Dumfries. Daniel at the wheel, Laura navigating by an out-of-date sat-nav, and in the back seat, 2 teenagers. 16-year-old Jessica glued to a true crime podcast. 14-year-old Sophie composing TikTok carols under her breath. They were late, hungry and buzzing with excitement because Laura's brother Mark had written an invitation 3 weeks earlier. "Come spend Christmas with us in our new house, 14 Foxglove Lane. We'll be out at a charity gala until after midnight on the 24th. Key hidden in the brass box behind the holly bush beside the door. Make yourselves at home." The fog was so thick that Laura had to squint to read the house numbers. Finally, they spotted 14 in Gothic numerals on a gate post and cheered in weary unison. Daniel pulled up. The headlights carved twin tunnels through the mist. Jessica and Sophie bounded out to find the brass key box. They fumbled behind every prickly bush until Sophie triumphantly brandished a little tin strongbox. Inside, a single tarnished key. The front door opened with a grateful sigh. Inside smelled faintly of pine and paint, exactly the scent of a brand new house. The hallway gleamed, the kitchen sparkled, and an enormous Christmas tree dominated. The living room, baubles winking in colored strands of light. They flicked on lamps, dropped luggage, and soaked up the silence. "Uncle Mark has taste," Jessica declared, peering at an abstract painting of swirling gold. "And money," Sophie added, opening the stainless steel fridge to discover truffle, pâté, and cranberry fizz water. Posh. Laura, though, felt a flicker of uncertainty. She didn't recognize the family photographs lining the mantel. Strangers beaming at ski resorts, a golden retriever she'd never met, a toddler dressed as a pumpkin. But fatigue smothered her doubts. Maybe they bought the frames with the stock photos still inside, Daniel suggested, earning an eye roll from Laura. They made tea, ate the mince pies they'd brought along, and collapsed into plush sofas, dozing off to the crackle of a pre-programmed fireplace video on the smart TV. Near 1 in the morning, they tottered upstairs and chose bedrooms at random. Christmas morning dawned crisp and clear. Fog had lifted overnight. Daniel padded to the kitchen in search of coffee. He stopped short. A silver-haired man in tartan pajamas was unloading a dishwasher. Opposite him, a woman in a festive robe dusted icing sugar onto pastries. Daniel blinked. They blinked back. Merry Christmas?" Daniel ventured. The woman recovered first. "You must be the neighbors. I'm Rosemary Brown. This is my husband, Philip. Are you lost?" Upstairs, Laura heard voices and hurried down, daughters in tow. Introductions tumbled out in a flurry of embarrassment. "We're the Williams family. My brother Mark King lives here. Or so we thought." "Ah," said Philip, rubbing his chin. "Mark and Julie King moved into number 16. You're at 14. A beat of mortified silence. Then everyone spoke at once. The fog. "Identical doors. I swear the key worked." Rosemary laughed, a warm chimney corner sound. "Our houses are clones." But your key? Mark must use the same locksmith the developer hired. Lucky coincidence. Daniel ran a hand through his hair. We drank your tea. We ate your mince pies. Then Christmas is already started, Philip said, sliding a tray of cinnamon rolls onto the table. Sit, eat. Nobody should drive anywhere on an empty stomach. And so the Browns gained 4 unexpected guests. Jessica fed croissant ends to the golden retriever. Yes, the one from the mantle photo. Sophie recorded a TikTok titled POV. You break into the wrong house, but they adopt you for breakfast. Laughter ricocheted between pine garlands and modern art. At 10:30, fortified by coffee and goodwill, the Williams family trundled next door, gifts and luggage in hand. Laura rang the bell of number 16. Mark opened it wearing a sequined Santa hat, jaw dropping at the sight of his sister plus entourage, plus an apologetic golden retriever that had followed them down the path. Stories were exchanged, hugs piled up, and the day blossomed into a double house celebration. Browns and Kings and Williamses shuttled dishes along the pavement like a holiday bucket brigade. Roast goose from one kitchen, sticky toffee pudding from the other, board games set up mid-street on a borrowed trestle table. Neighbors emerged to see what the commotion was and were promptly handed mulled cider. As twilight painted the sky a tender violet, Daniel lifted his glass for a toast. To wrong doors leading to right friendships. Glasses clinked, dogs barked. Someone launched into Fairy Tale of New York on a tinny Bluetooth speaker, and nobody bothered to correct the lyrics. Later, Rosemary pressed the brass key into Laura's hand. Souvenir, she said, a reminder that hospitality sometimes begins with a mistake. Laura slipped it into her pocket, heart swollen. She would keep it, polish the tarnish away, and hang it on next year's tree. A tiny metal pledge that even in a world of identical houses and stubborn fog, kindness is what turns any set of walls into home. Chapter 9. A Ride with Madame Rosa. Picture a mild spring afternoon outside East Bridge Station in Brighton. I was leaning against my cab, cap tilted low, nursing a takeaway coffee and wondering whether the lull in fares meant I should call it a day. Seagulls wheeled overhead, commuters hurried past with headphones in, and the platform clock insisted it was only 3 o'clock. Plenty of daylight left to earn another fare. That was when I noticed them. 2 women standing by a timetable, bored, luggage at their feet, a well-thumbed guidebook fluttering between them like a wounded bird. One was tiny, late 70s at least, wrapped in an ivory trench coat fastened to the chin. The other, perhaps 40, carried the heavier bags and looked nervously from map to street signs. The older woman wore crimson lipstick and a silk scarf knotted artfully at the throat. Someone who had known elegance for decades. She reminded me of a retired opera singer stepping on stage for the curtain call she'd never quite finished. I strolled over and offered my best schoolboy French. Excusez-moi, mesdames. Puis-je vous aider? The younger one brightened, responded in quick, Parisian French that outpaced my vocabulary, then switched to accented English. We need the Café La Bonne Dame on Marine Parade, but the book is confusing. Tram? Bus? We do not know. Hop in, I said, gesturing toward the cab. I'll take you there. Brighton's not so big once you let someone else mind the left turns. The older lady fixed me with sparkling hazel eyes. Merci, monsieur, she said in a voice like fine cognac. I am Rosa Chevalier. This is my granddaughter, Claire. Leon Garner, I replied, tipping my cap. They settled into the back seat. Claire buckled Madame Rosa safely, then pressed her forehead to the window, watching the pastel terraces slide by. I clicked the meter and eased into traffic, deciding a short scenic route would be nicer than the direct coastal drag, just enough to show off the pavilion's onion domes, the antique shops of the lanes, and the iron ribs of the Old West Pier. At each landmark, I offered a sentence or two. That's the Royal Pavilion, built for a prince who loved curry. Or, over there the fishermen still mend nets by hand. Madame Rosa nodded politely, but never spoke. Claire snapped photos on her phone. I caught glimpses of them in the mirror, the granddaughter beaming at every sight, the grandmother's gaze lingering on the sea as though it were singing an old lullaby. 10 minutes later, we turned onto Marine Parade. Voila! I announced, braking beside a narrow storefront whose sign, La Bonne Dame, sported a chipped teacup logo. The fare was $7.40. Claire handed me a 10-pound note and told me to keep the change. They stepped onto the pavement, luggage in tow, waving their thanks. I tipped my cap again, feeling virtuous for having provided honest service and a mini tour to boot. I was about to pull away when I noticed a small cloth pouch resting on the back seat, embroidered with faded roses, no bigger than a glasses case. I grabbed it, called out the window, but the women had already disappeared inside the cafe. With a shrug, I tossed the pouch onto the passenger seat, meaning to run it in after parking, then headed for the rank on Queens Road to Q4, the late afternoon rush. Only I never made it. 5 minutes later, 2 police officers flagged me down near the pier. My first irrational thought was that I'd sped through a red light, but the older officer greeted me courteously. Mr. Garner? We've been asked to retrieve lost property from your cab. I frowned, then remembered the embroidered pouch. Ah, belongs to the French ladies, I said, passing it over. The officer opened the drawstring carefully. Inside lay a tarnished brass locket on a velvet ribbon, and on the ribbon a tag written in careful script, "Pour Madame Rosa, de ta petite fille Claire. 30 ans. For a 30th birthday, an heirloom no doubt." The officer smiled. "The cafe owner phoned us. They thought you'd gone." Guilt pricked me. I meant to return it honestly. Got pulled into traffic. Just then Claire came, running down the pavement, wind whipping her hair. She was breathless, frantic. When she saw the locket, her shoulders dissolved in relief. "You found it!" Grandmère would be heartbroken. Her husband gave that to her the day they fled Paris in 1940. She clasped the pouch, eyes shining. "Thank you, Monsieur Garner. You saved our family treasure." Behind her, Madame Rosa approached more slowly, leaning on a cane I hadn't noticed earlier. She touched my arm, whispered, "Grace à vous," and kissed the air beside each cheek. The gesture was so gracious, so effortlessly French, that traffic noise seemed to hush in respect. I cleared, my throat oddly moved. "It was nothing," I said. "Happy to help." Claire insisted on paying the fare again, this time with a crisp 20, which I tried to refuse, but she tucked into my shirt pocket. "For your kindness," she said, and then added, almost conspiratorially, "and for the scenic tour." Grandmère loved the iron skeleton of the old pier. She said it reminds her that ruins can still be beautiful. As I drove away, I caught sight of them through the rear mirror. The grandmother adjusting her scarf in the cafe doorway. The granddaughter looping the locket gently around her neck. A gull cried overhead. Gulls always do. But the sound felt different, like a note carried across generations. That evening, I pulled the cab onto the seafront, engine ticking warm, and watched violet dusk settle over the channel. Sometimes a driver ferries nothing but strangers from point A to point B. Other times he transports a memory that predates him by half a century. And if he's lucky, if the traffic lights sink green and the sea breeze smells of salt and stories, he gets repaid not in tips, but in the knowledge that for one small detour, he helped history stay intact, clasped safely around the neck of a woman who has already crossed more bridges than I'll ever count. Chapter 10. Strands of Misfortune. Let me take you to a slate-colored Wednesday night on the Mile End Road, where puddles flashed like broken mirrors beneath the street lamps, and a chill rain blew sideways off the Thames. I was behind the wheel of my battered delivery van, 2 hours late for supper and thinking only of the kettle my wife would have boiling when I got home. The wipers flogged the windscreen. The heater wheezed lukewarm air. That was when I saw her, an elderly woman standing, alone at a bus stop outside a closed laundrette, coat collar turned up, silk headscarf pulled tight. The last eastbound bus had thundered past 10 minutes earlier. Conscience jabbed me in the ribs. I slowed, leaned across, and cranked the passenger window a crack. "Evening, ma'am. You'll be waiting all night. Want a lift somewhere dry?" She lifted her face, eyes the color of dishwater, lips tight. She inclined her head once, no words, then opened the door and climbed in with surprising strength, hauling after her a canvas tote the size of a small coffin. The van dipped under its weight. She settled, smoothed her scarf, and clasped her, hands on the tote. That was when I noticed them. Hands far too large for so slight a frame. Broad knuckles, sinewy tendons, and a pelt of coarse black hair crawling across the backs like tangled fishing line. It wasn't the gentle fuzz you see on some elderly arms. This was dense, wiry, unmistakably masculine. A prickle ran down my spine. "Where to?" I asked, trying for casual. A dry whisper emerged, thick with an accent I couldn't place. "Dockside. End of Crosshaven Street." That was a bleak strip of disused warehouses, hardly residential. The prickle grew claws. We rolled on. Rain drummed harder, masking the van's usual rattles. I stole glances. She kept those hairy hands clamped on. The tote, thumbs brushing the frayed seams as though counting seconds. No wedding band, no wrinkles around the mouth from smiling either. Just a long, thin scar above the right eyebrow, barely visible beneath the scarf's hem. To break the silence, I flicked on the radio, late-night jazz, but she reached out and switched it off with one decisive twist. Up close, the hair on her knuckles looked wet, glistening in the dashboard glow. That's when a headline flashed through my mind. "Police hunt Harry Joe, knife point robber still at large." A week earlier, the Gazette had printed a CCTV still, gloved face, but unmistakable hairy hands clutching a grocery bag. My pulse hammered so loud I feared she'd hear it. I forced a cough. "Sorry, tail lights have been acting up. Mind hopping out for a sec, letting me know if they're working?" We were idling at an amber light beside an all-night petrol station. Cameras, attendants, bright fluorescents. Safe ground. She hesitated, eyes narrowing. Then she nodded once, unlatched the door, and stepped into the rain, leaving the overweight tote on the seat. The instant her soles hit tarmac, I slammed the lock, dropped the van into gear, and lurched. Across 2 lanes into the station forecourt. She spun, pounded the door with a hairy fist, hollering in that ragged whisper, but I was already leaning on the horn, waving frantically at the cashier behind the glass. 2 constables on patrol happened to be filling their cruiser. They hustled over. I pointed at the tote, words tumbling. "Passenger, strange hands, said Dockside. "Look." They drew it open. First a coil of duct tape, then a length of nylon rope, then, wrapped in a towel, the kind of hunting knife you'd see in survival catalogs, 9 inches of serrated steel. Beneath it all lay a cheap latex mask and a note scrawled in block capitals. Back entrance 0115, safe code 9342. One constable radioed colleagues. The other supervised as they cuffed the woman, who'd stalked after us into the forecourt, water coursing off her scarf. Under overhead lamps, the scarf slipped. Her short-cropped hair and square jaw were unmistakably male. Detective later told me that Madame Rosa was really Joseph Kemple, ex-dock worker turned serial thief, hiding in shabby glamour to lull night drivers like me. The press had dubbed him the Strand Bandit because of the hair, ironic, given the silk he wrapped. Round his Adam's apple, statements, photographs, a proper cup of station tea. It was nearly dawn before I climbed back into my van. The rain had eased. City pigeons were already pecking at kebab wrappers. I sat there, engine off, listening to the hiss of tires on wet asphalt, thinking how a random pang of pity had steered me onto a knife-sharp edge of danger. When I finally crept through my own front door, my wife, robe tied tight, kettle long cold, met me in the hallway. "Strands of misfortune," I told her, shaking, "but we're all right." She poured fresh tea, dropped in too much sugar, and pressed the mug into my hands until they stopped trembling. The next evening, the Gazette ran a new headline. "Harry Joe caught in cab sting, local driver praised." They asked for a photo. I declined. A van is anonymous for a reason. But I kept the clipping, folded in my wallet, right next to my license. A reminder that kindness must sometimes ride shotgun with caution, especially on nights when the rain hides more than puddles and the gentlest voiced passenger carries danger by the handle. And every time I spot a solitary figure at a bus stop after midnight, I still slow down. Just not before scanning their hands in the glow of the street lamp, looking for those telltale strands of misfortune that once turned a routine lift into the longest ride of my life. Great work today. Every moment you spend practicing brings you closer to mastering your English listening and speaking skills. Remember, progress comes with patience and consistency. If this story inspired you or helped you in your learning journey, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Easy English Spark channel for more lessons and stories. Keep listening, keep speaking, and keep believing in your growth. I'll see you in the next video. Take care and keep shining.